Welcome to part 2 of my Song of Ice and Fire terrain series. Today we are going to get dug in for siege by building the wooden palisades, spiked fences, and ruined stone walls. To build the fences, I bought some dowels. I measured the correct width by holding the dowels over the circular tops printed on the tokens. Next, I grabbed some EVA foam and cut it out to the correct size by tracing the cardboard tokens. The foam was a little too thick, so I carefully split it in half with an X-Acto knife. The foam was hot glued down and anything that hung over was cut off. The sides were then sanded with my Dremel. I had to make sure to wear a dust mask so I didn't breathe any of this powder in. Using the X-Acto knife, I carved a trench for the palisades into the EVA foam. The dowels were measured out and cut to different lengths to give the palisades a more rugged look. I had to clean up the bottoms, and then holding my X-Acto blade at a 45-degree angle, I sharpened them to points. Then I tied some string I had lying around into a slip knot and snagged it around the first log in the palisade. I glued in more dowels and lashed them together with the string. When I got to the end, the string was glued down and cut off. I repeated this process again higher up on the palisade. For the spike fences, I measured out the dowels evenly, cleared off the excess at the bottom, and cut them to points. I ended up having to blunt them because they got really sharp. A single piece of dowel was glued down next to another to make an X. I created X's on both the start and the end of the fence so I could evenly space out the middle. Once all the X's were added, I cut another piece of dowel to create this cross beam. The beam was glued to the ruts of each X. Similar to the palisades, I tied a piece of string into a slip knot and lashed the dowels to the crossbeam. After everything was built, I used a mix of dirt and glue to base all of the pieces. Once the glue was dried, it was spray painted with a 2-in-1 brown spray paint primer that resembles the Citadel paint color Rhinoxide. I missed some spots with the spray paint and had to clean them up with the brown Citadel paint. Now for the brick walls. I'm using a block of keto clay. I wanted Sculpey, but for some reason I bought this stuff instead. It was super plasticky and hard to mix together, but once it was, I rolled it out using a piece of PVC pipe and a few of these wall tokens taped together to keep the clay at a set width. Once rolled out, I used this template I made that is the exact size of the wall printed on the token. Using my X-Acto knife, I cut the clay to shape. Since the bricks were going to be staggered, I cut some of them shorter than others. I round the edges to make the bricks look older. This is a polymer clay, so it needs to go into the oven to harden. Once cooked, I dry fit the bricks together while using a figure as a scale guide. Using white PVA glue, I paste down the bricks to the cardboard token directly. I use my template to keep the walls straight. Mixing PVA glue and dollar store spackle, I make a mortar and start stacking the bricks. For the ruined walls, I don't use any mortar and just glue them together with PVA glue. Then I use spackle to build up the flatness of the cardboard base. I layer spackle over the lowest area of the ruined wall to make it look like it has been climbed over or is sinking into the ground. I press some leftover bricks into the spackle to make it look like they broke off from the wall. The spackle and basing mix will help keep these down. I also put some of the basing mix on top of the wall for extra texture. Once dry, I took everything outside and spray painted it brown. Then it was ready to paint. Like in my previous video, the ground of all these pieces was painted in a 4-step Citadel paint scheme. The first layer was my Rhinox hide colored spray paint, then a dry brushing of Morphang brown, followed by Talaran sand. The large exposed rocks are painted with Administerum gray. The bricks of the wall were painted gray with a heavy body acrylic paint, and any areas of the ground were cleaned up with Rhinox hide. I used multiple light layers of dry brushed Administerum gray on the edges of the bricks, and watered down Talaran sand on the mortar. The sharp part of the wooden spikes were painted with Ushabi bone, and the string was painted with white scar. This process was slow and tedious, and any mess-ups were covered by Rhinox hide. Agrax Earthshade was added over the Ushabi bone spikes, then dry brushed with white scar. Then it was time to add some static grass and army painter tufts, and these pieces were complete. Ultimately, I think I should have made the bricks of the wall slightly thinner, and maybe should have dry brushed the Palisade spikes something darker, but regardless, I like how these ended up, and if you're interested in seeing how I build a giant tree with a face, or a bunch of dead bodies, I hope you join me for the final part of this terrain series, where I'm building the horrific and inspirational pieces.